If you're a maintenance supervisor for a commercial property, you've had to deal with everything from leaky faucets to flickering light bulbs. But nothing's worse than that ancient boiler that's lived in the building since the day it was built, 50 years ago. It's enough to make anyone lose their cool. That's where Grainger comes in. With industrial-grade products and dependable fast delivery, Grainger can help with any challenge, from worn-out components to everyday necessities. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Other shows we have for you to enjoy at myclassicradio.net. The Avengers was most certainly not a household name in South Africa prior to the radio series. With no national television service until 1976, the mechanism simply was not present in the country to show television programs to mass audiences. While many other countries reveled in the filmed adventures of John Steed and company, South Africa was not equipped to join in the fun. The series took Britain by storm and made a major impression in the American markets, being the greatest of rarities, a British series given a network transmission slot. However, as a filmed series, rather than a videotaped one, The Avengers was able to gain a modicum of exposure in South Africa through film rentals. Come and listen at myclassicradio.net.
Calling all detectives. People go to school to study all sorts of subjects. But I once had a case where somebody was studying how to be a murderer. That is the situation on this page from my casebook. The casebook of Jerry Browning, private detective. A private detective like me, Jerry Browning, gets his education in the School of Hard Knocks. And the way he knows he's passing the course is because he's still alive. The man who came into my office introduced himself as Richard Gibby. I'm a chemistry instructor at Dunlop College, Mr. Browning. Professor Logan does the actual teaching. I supervise the students' laboratory experiments. I knew the school that had a good reputation. Do you work with the day or the night classes, Mr. Gibby? The night classes. We get people of all ages, all backgrounds in our night sessions. Quite different from the daytime enrollment. I would imagine so. What's your trouble, Mr. Gibby? Thefts? Gibby nodded. Yes, but not the kind you might think. Mr. Browning, somebody has enrolled in that chemistry class for some sinister purpose. A quantity of poisons has disappeared from our lab supplies. I'm afraid somebody is learning to be a murderer. Whom else have you told this to? Nobody. The lab supplies are my personal responsibility. I don't have very much money, but I do need help. I'll help you, Mr. Gibby. I've always wanted to meet a murderer while he was learning the business. When poisons disappeared from a night school chemistry lab, I agreed to find the potential murderer. The next evening, I had an interview with Professor Logan just before his class assembled. He was a handsome man in his early 40s, very different from the average idea of a professor. Jerry Brown, eh? Why are you entering the class in the middle of the semester, Mr. Brown? Well, Professor, I just want to brush up on chemistry for my own satisfaction. Logan nodded. Well, all right, since Mr. Gibby is satisfied with your qualifications. So there I was, Jerry Brown, student, trying to figure out which was the business end of a Bunsen burner. The classroom sessions with Logan weren't bad. I could sit quietly and study the students, of whom there were about 20. The lab sessions, even with Gibby there to help me bluff my way by, were harder. There's a lot of tricky apparatus in a lab, and if you're not careful... That scoop of acid I knocked off the table hissed viciously as it hit the floor. A blonde girl working alongside of me jumped to escape the spatter. Instantly, a red-headed young guy rushed over to her, made sure she hadn't been hurt. I don't know anything about chemistry, but I know all about the look he gave her. That was love. Just then, Gibby came over, did something about the acid on the floor, gave me a hurt look. The boy and girl went back to their experiments, but not before he murmured, "How about buying you a hamburger after class, Betty?" The girl shook her head, said something about having promised Professor Logan that she'd help correct the papers from another class. The classroom session under Professor Logan followed the lab session. It was a long lecture about carbon chains and almost put me to sleep. After class, the blonde girl remained in her seat while the rest of us filed out. Gibby cornered me after the rest of the students had left. Well, Mr. Browning, do you know who the thief is? No, it's much too soon to tell. Who's the blonde girl and that red-headed guy? She's Betty Walker. The boy is Randall Forrester. They call him Red. You don't suspect them? I shrugged. I suspect everybody. Huh? See you tomorrow, Mr. Gibby. After a week, I had the students pretty well sorted in my mind. There were 3 budding romances going on, including the one between Betty and Red, which last wasn't going too smoothly. It seemed Betty had part of her tuition refunded because she helped Professor Logan, and Red didn't like that a bit. On the following Monday after the lab class, Professor Logan wasn't on hand to deliver a lecture. Instead, the dean of the college walked in.
I am sorry to say Professor Logan will be away for a few days because of a death in his family.
I got the story from Gibby after class. It's dreadful, Browning. Mrs. Logan died suddenly a few hours ago. At first they thought it was indigestion, then heart attack. Browning, do you suppose there can be any connection between her death and the stolen poisons? I don't know. But if somebody hated Logan and wanted to strike at him, that might be a way. Late that night, I had a talk with the coroner. Look, doctor, I hate to start anything. Mrs. Logan's death has been diagnosed as heart attack, but if you suspected poison and made an autopsy on your own initiative, it might prove interesting. A week later, Professor Logan was back. During that time, with him out of the way, the romance between Betty and Red really flourished. Now it was ready for another setback. Logan called his class to order, apologized for his absence in a dry, tight voice. Then the hour drew to a close.
Betty, Miss Walker, if you'll be good enough to remain a few minutes after class, I'd like to discuss the work that has accumulated during my absence.
Alongside of me, Red started to say something. I took his arm. Come on outside, Red. I want to talk to you. He was so surprised, he let me propel him out of the room.
Hey, what's the big idea?
The big idea is that I'm a detective and that Mrs. Logan died of poisoning. Come on, you and I have some talking to do. What I was waiting for happened 2 nights later in Logan's class.
Mr. Forrester, I am not satisfied with your lab experiments on cellulose. Tonight after class, I suggest you repeat the experiment and report to me tomorrow.
I met the boy after class. All set, Red?
Yeah, but I'm a little scared.
Don't worry. You'll have plenty of protection. It happened 10 minutes after the boy left for the lab. Logan was the first one in the lab, and even before he got there, he was moaning about that poor red-headed boy and how careless he'd always been with explosive chemicals. Nothing to worry about, Professor. Red is right in back of you. There was nobody in the lab when your bomb went off. Logan grabbed for a bottle of cyanide, but I knocked it out of his hand. He wasn't going to get off that easy. He had a date with high voltage. And finally, he kept it. He'd been stealing the poisons in order to get rid of his wife and paved the way to marrying Betty. And when it looked as though Red Forrester might be in the way, well, what's one murder more to a man like that? What he didn't know was that as soon as his wife's death was properly diagnosed, he'd been under constant police surveillance. Like I said, people are like chemistry. Get the wrong combination, and you'll have the kind of explosion that spells murder. Listen next time to Calling All Detectives. Mystery drama, mystery quiz, and a chance for you to match wits with yours truly, Jerry Browning, Private Detective.